The beat of a drum, chanting, toning, kirtan, Tibetan bowls, gongs. For thousands of years, we've integrated ritual and sacred sound into our human experience. In recent years, using sound to heal has had a popular resurgence with practitioners integrating healing sounds with massage therapy, using sound baths to align energy, and using tones such as solfeggio frequencies to help people reduce stress and calibrate their bodies to healing frequencies of energy. Research shows that sound can reduce stress by reducing the production of cortisol and increasing the release of stress-reducing neurotransmitters. It can also reduce stress by reducing a patient's sense of isolation and helping them connect with positive places within themselves. Sound can help healthy circulation by reducing blood pressure and stabilizing the heart rate. It strengthens the immune system by triggering the production of gamma globulin A and killer cells. Sound can help improve mood by increasing the production of dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. It can help patients manage pain better than medication alone. Beyond these general benefits, music has been shown to have specific benefits for specific hospital patients. In a neonatal ward, music can give a newborn a soothing first experience of sound, replacing the beeping of medical machinery. In a COVID unit, it can help a patient with compromised lungs stabilize erratic respiration. In a cancer ward, it can help a patient cope better with pain. In a waiting room, it can help ease the anxiety. Of an upcoming procedure. In the quantum alignment system, where we integrate energy psychology and quantum human design, we use sound frequencies and tones specifically engineered to calibrate your 9 centers to their baseline frequency. We use a combination of special baseline frequencies to strengthen your energy body towards a higher state of resiliency. In our work, we found that adding sound frequencies acts as a band-aid or a splint, keeping you from defaulting to old thought patterns and conditioned behaviors by helping you hold your energy in place, even when your body and mind tend to try to go back to old patterns when you get stressed or challenged. And of course, the language of quantum human design is deliberately calibrated towards words that hold higher frequencies of energy. I literally tested all the words we use in quantum human design and specifically engineered them to hold high frequencies of energy to help you build an energy grid to hold your evolving personal narrative so that you can anchor your deconditioned story energetically while you do the material work to transform your life. Every season of the Quantum Revolution podcast, we choose a theme. This season, we're hosting guests who are pioneers in the field of healing, brave scientists who are willing to explore how we can best achieve optimal health and well-being. Today's guest is a pioneer in the field of cymatics, the science of sound and making sound visible. John Stuart Reid is an acoustic physics scientist with a mission to educate, inspire, and excite the world in the field of visible sound, known to science as Faraday waves, and to an ever-growing number of researchers and explorers as cymatics. Reid points out that since sound underpins almost all matter in the universe and was a potent force in the creation of life in the primordial oceans, it also carries the power to heal life. In his frequent lectures, he reveals groundbreaking information on the mechanisms that underpin sound therapy and how it can be applied to improve health naturally. Reid's career in acoustics has spanned 5 decades, and he is widely acknowledged as an authority in cymatic science and speaks on the subject at conferences in Europe and America. His CymaScope invention has changed our perception of sound forever. Seeing sound allows us to understand this omnipresent aspect of our world and universe more fully and more deeply.
You're listening to Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker, exploring new frontiers in consciousness, science, and evolution. Join us in intimate conversations with cutting-edge scientists, spiritual leaders, artists, disruptors, and visionaries who are working towards reframing the narrative of our future by healing the rift between spirituality and science, reclaiming creativity, and laying the foundation for a new world. And now, here's your host, Karen Curry Parker.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Revolution. I'm excited to be having a conversation today with John Stuart Reid, and we're going to be talking about the power and the importance, and I would even say maybe the healing power of sound. So welcome, John. It's excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm really excited to have this second conversation with you. I loved the first conversation, and I'm sure that I love this one too.
Good. So you are an expert in a field called Cymatics. Talk to us for just a minute about what exactly is Cymatics.
Well, in a nutshell, Karen, Cymatics is the science of sound made visible. And, some people say to me, well, can't we already make sound visible with, things like spectrum analyzers and oscilloscopes and conventional instrumentation? But I would say that no, not really, because with those kind of electronic instruments, what you're really doing is graphing the energy of sound. Mm-hmm. So what you're looking at, say, on an oscilloscope or a spectrum analyzer is some form of graph. And nature does not use graphs. In fact, sound is actually holographic, but it's also completely analog. Obviously, it's not, it's not in the digital domain. Obviously, nature doesn't use graphs. And so another surprising and perhaps confusing thing for some people to know is that all sounds that you've ever heard from your birth have been spherical in nature. They're not waves. People talk about sound waves, scientists talk about them, engineers talk about them, and we even get taught sound waves at school, in science class and so on. But the reality is that they don't exist. What does exist are sound bubbles. So, I'm speaking now, and what's coming out of my mouth and a little bit out of my nose are beautiful sound bubbles that are expanding at the speed of sound, of course. And as they expand, so they're also pulsating in and out with the actual periodicities, the vibrations of the sound itself. And so when a scientist or an engineer graphs that pulsation of the bubble, then you see it as a wave because it is literally following a natural law, a sinusoidal law. And therefore, of course, it looks like a wave. So this label, this name, has been tagged on sound waves, when in reality, they are sound bubbles. And this actually does have, significant impact on the way that we think about sound as it penetrates into our tissues. So, it's a very important thing to know that all the sounds you've ever heard have been spherical in their space form. And on the surface of that bubble is a beautiful pattern. And we sometimes I'm giving a presentation, I'll show an illustration of that. We have a beautiful illustration of a young woman playing a violin. And what's emerging from the violin strings is this gorgeous bubble with a beautiful pattern on the surface. And this, and it's transparent, obviously, you can see through it. And this gives everyone a really good mental picture of what sound looks like in reality.
And I have seen some of the images that you have on your website, and I think even if you search the internet, these images are stunning, right? They look, they look like mandalas almost.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very good reason for that, Karen. I come back to that in a second, but you started asking about what is cymatics, and I said it's sound made visible, but perhaps I need to explain a little bit more. Okay, so sound is spherical, or audible sounds at any rate are spherical. But what happens is with any sound, when it encounters a membrane, then it literally imprints a pattern, what we call a cymatic pattern, onto that membrane. This happens entirely naturally, entirely automatically. But of course, all of these patterns that are happening all around us all of the time on many different types of surfaces, I say a flexible surface, but in reality, most surfaces have some degree of flexibility. So even if we think of Ernst Chladni, who was the guy, the German scientist who's now in history been, championed as the man who invented the Chladni plate, as it's called. This is a metal plate. usually made of brass, or it can be made of aluminum or even steel. And I wouldn't have thought a long, long time ago that steel or brass or aluminum could be flexible to the degree that when sound impinges upon it, it creates a pattern on the surface of the metal. It's really a kind of bizarre thing to think about, but in reality, yes, sound can be imprinted onto metal plates. And of course, again, it's invisible, but what we then do is sprinkle on some revealing medium. And this could be talcum powder, it could be sand, it could be salt, anything that's going to basically reveal this invisible pattern. And it is a little bit like fingerprints or thumbprints, on a glass. They're virtually invisible, aren't they, until you sprinkle on some talcum powder, and that then reveals the pattern. So it's a little bit like that. And so cymatics, this bubble of energy that I've been referring to, when it encounters a membrane, then a beautiful pattern. If the sound is beautiful, then the pattern itself will be beautiful. It'll be symmetrical and have great visual beauty. And now we have to think that because sound is always all around us, there's never silence, never true silence, really. There are always sounds. We have to then think, well, what do these sounds do when they penetrate into our tissues? How do they manifest in our bodies, for example? So I could show you a demonstration, Karen, of sound entering into water, say, in the CymaScope instrument, which you see right behind me here now. It's a very small area of water. When sound enters into the water, then in the blink of an eye, literally a tiny fraction of a second, all the trillions and trillions of water molecules are beautifully organized. Really, it's gorgeous to behold. I know you've seen some of the cymatic imagery. We call them glyphs on our website, cymascope.com. And they are beautiful to behold, aren't they? And that beauty happens in, as I say, a tiny fraction of a second. As soon as sound enters into water, it has this almost magical ability to organize. So the same thing, of course, happens in our bodies. All of our cells, first of all, have membranes, of course. Every cell has a membrane, excepting the brain cells. But, all the trillions of cells in our body have membranes. And then, of course, all the visceral waters that are surrounding all of our organs. All of that is beautifully organized when we're in the presence, say, of music. We're in a musical environment, whether that from an actual musical instrument live, or recorded music from speakers, not through headphones, of course, because that's a different scenario. I'm talking now full body immersion in a beautiful musical soundscape. Then it's going to organize all of the visceral waters in our body, but also that music is going to imprint onto every cellular membrane, and that has many medical and health-related implications, of course. It's not just then pretty patterns, which they are, but then they have an actual purpose, they have an application in our bodies.
So I think one of the other things that you had said in our previous discussion is you had talked about how all of the reactions in the body, all the chemical reactions in the body actually carry a sound. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, yes, again, this is not something that many people actually know about. Even I have spoken even to some neuroscientists, and they were astounded by this concept. But they had to admit, once I explained it to them, they had to admit its reality. It's just what happens, Karen, in science is there's a lot of compartmentalization. So, a neuroscientist really doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of physics. A physicist doesn't really ever think too much about what's happening in their brain from a neuroscience point of view. Well, even if they think about it, they're not really permitted within their scientific discipline to cross-pollinate, as it were. They have to stay within the bounds of their own science. And this is a sad thing, I think, in science. And from, but from a fortunate point of view, I can go anywhere I like in science, and I can think anywhere I want to think, and I can write anything I want to write. There's no one, pulling my strings, so to speak. So it makes it possible then for me to kind of join the dots between many different sciences. And in this case, let's talk about the thoughts that we are having in our brain when we think about anything. It doesn't matter what subject it is. This relates to, is represented by trillions of biochemical reactions that are happening in the neurons of the brain. Obviously, the neurons, billions of neurons in our brain. When we have any thought, what immediately happens is that the molecules within the neurons start to vibrate, start to oscillate, basically. Mm-hmm. And if we then think about it from a physics standpoint, what happens is when any two atoms or two molecules literally collide with each other, then that is a definition of sound. So if you now think about a complex pattern of energy in the neurons of the brain that are involved in this thought, whatever this thought is, mm-hmm. that then causes sound to be created in the brain. Mm-hmm. This sound, you can never have sound isolated in a sense where there's no light as well. That always sound and light go hand in hand. And the reason this is true is because, again, coming back to the physics of it, these are called inelastic collisions between atoms or molecules. When you have an inelastic collision, which is also a definition of sound, that also means that you have to have a release or a launch of electromagnetism. So literally two atoms that are vibrating then collide with each other, launches or gives birth, you could say, to light. And the light that's given birth in our bodies all of the time, because of course we have biochemical reactions happening not only in the brain, but throughout our whole body or our whole organism. Mm-hmm. All of those trillions and trillions of reactions are not only creating sound, but also creating infrared light. Almost all of the light that's created is in the infrared spectrum. And that is actually why we are warm. That's why we have warm bodies, right? But also, if you read the science, you will find that some of the light that's created are biophotons that are literally in the visible spectrum, and also a little bit, very small amount in the ultraviolet spectrum. And these are the result of very high-speed collisions that are happening inside of our high velocity, I should say, inside our cells, create these biophotons that are visible and even into the UV. And Annalise and I actually went to a really wonderful conference in Slovakia where one of the speakers was showing his research into this subject, and we're using a very high sensitivity photomultiplier system, which effectively amplifies, photon activity, and was able to show literally the visible light coming off someone's hands. Mm. And it's just really a cool thing to see, to see that we're actually creating not only warmth, infrared, but also visible light. I mean, who knew,
Well, it makes sense when we think of ourselves, or we refer to ourselves as light beings, right? That we are light beings.
Yeah.
So
well, we literally are
light beings.
are literally light beings. And of course, there are many creatures who can see our light in the infrared spectrum. I mean, we don't have the eyes to see that, but many creatures in the world can see in infrared. So they see a different kind of view, of our bodies than we see ourselves. Anyway, so these are really fascinating aspects of sound that are not generally known, and again have many implications in terms of health and our wellness.
So what might be some of the applications that you are contemplating or looking at, or that others are looking at in relation to sound and healing in the body?
Well, that's a great question. One of the main discoveries that was made in this lab, where you see me sitting here now, with Professor Sung-Chul Ji and I, we did this amazing piece of research, it's like 4 years ago now, time flies on, where I'd had this hunch, Karen, that music may affect the longevity of red blood cells. It was just an intuitive thing. And it really came about because I'd been thinking about Pythagoras of Samos, and I'm sure you know that he was quoted as saying that music could be used in place of medicine. One of his biographers, Iamblichus, reported that. None of Pythagoras' own writings are now extant. They've all been lost somehow. But fortunately, Pythagoras did have many biographers, people who followed him, the Pythagoreans, as they're called, and wrote down a lot of what Pythagoras had said, sort of reported it secondhand. Anyway, so apparently he had said that music could be used in place of medicine. And I came to realize in the course of my work that it was all inspired by that amazing event that occurred in the Great Pyramid in 1997, when I was miraculously healed of, a very severe lower back pain. And I was healed within only 20 minutes of making sound, and yet no amount of, analgesics that I'd been popping like M&Ms before, 3 weeks before going out to Egypt when I'd sustained this injury 3 weeks earlier. No amount of painkillers, no amount of visits to physiotherapists. I'd had a couple of visits anyway, and nothing really had touched the pain. And yet here, only 20 minutes of making sound in the King's Chamber, and all of that pain left me, and it never came back. So that's what really, set me on this journey of exploration into sound in terms of, its ability to mediate pain for sure, but also in many other aspects. Anyway, I'm going off tangent here, coming back to Pythagoras of Samos and his statement. And I came to realize that really that hadn't been tested very well. It was really more of a hypothesis, you could say, than a theory. And then so, that percolated a little bit in my mind for a while. And then one morning I was just waking up. Some of my best ideas come to me when it's the same for you, when we're in that kind of theta state of brain. Anyway, I suddenly had this idea for an experiment using human blood, primarily because blood is very easily accessible, not only, from one's own body, if you want to do it that way, but also from blood banks. You can easily buy blood. And so I had this idea. The essence of it was to take some whole human blood, and then which arrives from the blood bank, by the way, in a series of test tubes, then to decant some of that blood into 2 smaller test tubes, warm it first to normal blood temperature, because it arrives in a kind of chilled state, warm it to blood temperature, decant it, and then one of these test tubes would go into our Faraday cage in the lab here, which is a very quiet room. It's acoustically lined. It's also electromagnetically screened, so no electromagnetism of any kind can get into that cage. If you took in there a radio or a television or a smartphone or, whatever, you would get no signal at all. That's just a way of saying that no electromagnetism can penetrate that cage, and virtually no sound. It's really, really quiet in there. You can hear your own breathing. You can hear your own heart sounds. It's so quiet. Anyway, so that's the kind of control for the blood. And the other little vial of blood goes into another incubator. So there's an incubator in the Faraday cage, at blood temperature, and then another incubator in the main body of the lab here, which then has a small speaker in it. So now we can play music to the blood. And because I'm not a biologist, I know a lot about biology now, by the way, but, those 4 years ago when we started these, I knew only the rudiments really of biology. I was, I'm a scientist in the acoustic physics, not in biology, but now I'm actually, very, very keenly interested in all aspects of biology. Anyway, at that time, I enlisted the help of Professor Sung-Chul Ji who then was still professor at Rutgers University in the US. Now emeritus, but he was, fully working with Rutgers at the time. Anyway, and so he helped to design the protocol for this experiment. He literally came here. We worked for a few days together to design this protocol. And the essence of it was that it would be a 20-minute period of immersion for the vial of blood in the laboratory incubator. So that blood would receive 20 minutes of music. And we had decided upon we'd test many different genres of music, not only classical, which we thought, by the way, would probably provide the best result. What did we know? But we tested many other genres, and also not many, but 3 concert pitches. We tested 432 hertz, 440 hertz, and 444 hertz. They're all popular pitches. Actually, the most popular concert pitch is the 440, which is the standard, international standard. But as you probably know, Karen, there are many people in the world, particularly some independent musicians, who are championing 432 hertz as being the most natural. And then you've got another bunch of people saying, no, 444 hertz is the most natural, and so on. Anyway, so we wanted to test all 3, and we did. But it's also important to mention here for your listeners or viewers that the music that we gathered together for these tests had to be played in that tuning. In other words, not electronically shifted, because these days in digital, as you know, you can pitch shift anything, from, say, it was originally recorded in 440 tuning. You can then just literally hit a slider on a piece of equipment and change that pitch down to 432 or up to 444 or anywhere you want. Well, we didn't want that. We wanted actual natural tuning of instruments and so on to make sure that that there was no implication to doing it electronically. Anyway, so we did all of that. And to cut a long story short, because this is a long story, but the essence of it is that every piece of music that we tried, including classical, including many popular genres, and in all the different concert pitches, all created really excellent increases in the viability of the red blood cells that we were testing. So your question, I'm coming now to answer the question, really, because you were referring here to Cymatics, and where does Cymatics come into this equation, as it were? Well, it comes in because it was only Cymatics which in the end showed us actually what the mechanism was, that underpins this seemingly miraculous effect, where you take a test tube of whole human blood. It will contain, millions and millions and millions, possibly even trillions, I'm not sure, but a lot of red blood cells. And in percentage terms, there might be, just for argument's sake, half of them will be alive and well, thank you very much. Say 25% will already be dead when they come from the blood bank. Then another 25% will be in a kind of transitory stage where they're classed as medically old. And what's happening, Karen, is that the outer membrane of the cells is starting to lose its integrity. So it's no longer the beautiful shape that you know of as a red blood cell. It's starting to break up and look rather, unpleasant on the eye. Anyway, the result of that, of course, in the body is that ultimately those old red blood cells will die and will be mopped up by the body's systems. But here we are working in vitro in a test tube. And what was happening was that these old red blood cells, like say 25% of these old red blood cells, were being made new again. It's like the genie in the lamp, new lamps for old. Well, here we had new cells for old. And so the kind of typical percentages that we were seeing increase in viability was anywhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20%, sometimes even a little bit higher. So these are old red blood cells that are no longer old. They've been regenerated as a result of being exposed to music. And of course, the head scratcher in that moment when we realized that this was happening was, okay, well, that's wonderful, wonderful result. Now, what is the mechanism? What's driving this mechanism? And the answer came from cymatics. So what we did was we realized that the frequency response of the speaker in this little incubator was quite, relatively poor low frequency response because it was a small speaker. And small speakers, they can never have a really excellent low frequency response. Just the physics of the size of the cone and so on dictate that. So we came to realize that, okay, well, maybe low frequencies are involved perhaps in driving this mechanism. And the reason that we came to think that, before I go further, is to say that the classical music had actually produced the poorest results. I said the range was kind of 15 to 20%. Well, the classical music would be, down towards the 15%. Music with a nice throbbing bass beat would be up to the 20%. So several percent difference between classical music and popular music. And that's why we thought, well, maybe it's the bass frequencies in the popular music, because, of course, classical music, tends not to have much of a bass register. Most of the energy in classical music is in the mid-range and in the upper frequencies. That's what led us down that little road. And then we thought, okay, well, how do we test this? Because the speaker in the incubator is very small and has this, relatively poor bass response. So that's when we decided to use the CymaScope instrument instead. And because the CymaScope instrument has a frequency response that goes down to 3 hertz, you see?
Wow.
So what we did was we injected whole human blood into the CymaScope instrument, a first in history, obviously. And we then, instead of putting music in, we wanted to do a better control experiment. And so we simply injected into the blood a very low frequency tone, just a pure sinusoidal tone of 40 hertz. And what we saw, what imprinted onto the surface of the blood, was a beautiful cymatic pattern. That wasn't a surprise because, any liquid, we normally use water as the revealing medium in CymaScope. But here we were using blood, which is obviously, quite a bit more viscous than water. But nevertheless, I started off by saying, that cymatic patterns appear all around us, really, imprint on all the surfaces around us, even solid, what we think of as solid surfaces, countertops, the screen of your computer, whatever, these are all surfaces that are actually, they have cymatic patterns on them. But here we were imprinting it onto human blood. And so we saw this beautiful pattern emerge, which was not a surprise, said. But then what was the surprise was we then stopped the 40 hertz tone, expecting the pattern to disappear. It did not.
Wow. Wow.
Did not disappear. What happened was this beautiful pattern just stayed on the surface of it's changed because the light that normally reflects off, the surface, we had turned that off. And what we saw instead was this bright scarlet pattern contrasted against the very dark maroon color of the natural blood, that's the natural color of the blood. When it comes from the blood bank, it's this extremely dark maroon color, very almost black to the eye. But as soon as you introduce sound into the blood, it goes bright scarlet, as we discovered. And when you then take the sound away, the scarlet pattern remains. And it remained there for anything up to about 20 minutes. It dissolved away very, very slowly and kind of merged in with the background, but over quite a period of time, 15, 20 minutes. And so this was really, really exciting because it told us immediately what the mechanism was that was driving this, regeneration of the old red blood cells. The mechanism is oxygen binding. So what happens is in our bodies, of course, we have a heart, a pump, which pumps the blood around the circulatory system, vascular system. It turns out that the heart has, we know the heart has multiple, purposes in the body. It isn't just a pump. It does all sorts of other things. But in this case, the big discovery was that the heart is actually creating sound pulses that have a purpose.
Wow.
Well, every heartbeat, of course, is a low-frequency pulse of sound. Everyone knows that. You just listen to your own heartbeat, and you know it's making this beautiful low-frequency pulses. But who knew that these low-frequency pulses are actually having a purpose? The purpose is to cause the oxygen that's already dissolved in your blood from normal respiratory situation. Your alveoli and your lungs are always gas exchanging and sending oxygen into your blood and taking the CO2 out. That's a normal part of the respiration, of course.
Right.
And blood in our bodies is completely engorged with oxygen all of the time. And but that oxygen cannot bind to the hemoglobin molecules in the red blood cells until there is a heartbeat. Everybody knew that. Wow. Right? Everyone knew that. What they didn't know was it's not just the pressure of the heart in terms of circulating the blood. It's literally the sound of the heartbeat that causes the oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin molecule, right? So now you see a picture in which cymatic science has revealed to us a completely, what seems like so commonplace, to know this. Now that we know it, it's like, oh yeah, of course. But we didn't know this before, right? And so Cymatic enabled us to discover something really magical, which is that whenever we are immersed in music, then the low frequency component in the music is actually helping our oxygenation in our bloodstream. So if we have a gong bath, if we're lying in a gong bath somewhere, or crystal bowl bath, or just in a musical concert, whether that be live music or recorded music, we are actually benefiting hugely. And the reason we are benefiting is because oxygen is the key ingredient, key molecule in the body that drives virtually all of the healing mechanisms. Not all of them, but most of the healing mechanisms in the body require copious amounts of oxygen to drive them. So music in that sense is helping us to heal at a very, very deep level. And this is all came about because of cymatics.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. And it just makes me think about just the innate understanding that we have, or the innate ways we've organized ourselves around sound, even in more indigenous settings, like when we sit in a drum circle, for example, or even just, we know that infants need that connection to, that holding, but maybe it's not just the holding, but also the connection to the sound of the heartbeat of the mother.
Absolutely. You mentioned drumming there, Karen. I mean, drumming is, we can now see exactly why drumming is so powerful as a healing tool, healing instrument, because it's basically mimicking what the heart is doing. It's literally mimicking the heartbeats. Oh gosh, this is it's really wonderful.
It's so exciting, and I think again continues to open up the possibility that the restoration of wellness, in addition to, augmenting healing on the material level, benefits when we incorporate what we think of as an alternative modality at this point. But when we start to build that science base, as you're doing, to show that these holistic treatments are not actually complementary, but are also integral to the healing process. I was flashing back when you were talking. I was thinking about how when I was first a nurse a long time ago, we worked really hard to get permission to play harps in the ICU. And we actually had a harp player come in and play in the ICU.
Wow.
The amount of resistance that we got at the time was just unbelievable. And thinking now about how actually when we brought those in, it settled, like our cases of ICU dementia went down or psychosis went down. And I wonder, what was actually playing there and what was actually going on. So.
Wow, that's really amazing to hear that. I didn't know that, because music therapy has actually been around since, I would say, the 1950s was really the rise of music therapy as a medical discipline. And so I didn't know that some hospitals actually resisted it. Mm-hmm. My present understanding is that music therapy is growing year upon year and is very prevalent in many hospitals. But of course, there could never be enough music therapists to go around. It's a very valuable discipline, but it's limited in that sense because millions of patients in hospitals all over the world, and there could never be enough music therapists. However, the good news is that many clinicians now are talking about music medicine, which has actually become a new clinical term. So if if any of your viewers look this up online, or listeners look it up, you'll find that music medicine is being explored by many hospitals now. And what they've come to realize, lo and behold, is that music has therapeutic properties, even without the presence of a therapist. Because, a therapist is a valuable aid. It's kind of a talk therapy as well as the patient receiving music. But of course, as my research has shown in the last 20 or so years, music does have many biological benefits for a person. And of course, specific sound frequencies as well, not just music, but specific sound therapy frequencies also have many benefits. But anyway, talking now about music therapy, full body immersion in music has a whole range of different therapeutic values to the body. And then there's a whole nother set of therapeutic values that come from listening to music or experiencing music through good quality headphones. Mm-hmm. And actually, the ideal scenario in a clinical setting for the future would be for patients to receive both simultaneously. Now, you might think, Karen, that, well, hang on, how can a patient prone in a hospital bed receive full body immersion in music? Mm-hmm. And it's a good question, but fortunately, today, there is actually a technology that can provide that, and I'd love to see this happen in the future in hospital settings, where what happens is instead of giving the patient music from a conventional speaker system, which of course would radiate throughout the ward, and everyone would experience that music. You don't want that, obviously, in a clinical setting. You want the patient to have their own music, perhaps, and not affect anyone else. And now ultrasound speakers are available that do exactly that. So an ultrasound speaker works to beam the music to the patient without anyone else outside of the beam being able to hear the music. So it's a very narrow beam of energy that's directed, either from the ceiling or from a high up on the wall behind the patient's bed, beams this music down to the patient. Only the patient can experience the music. Even a nurse or a doctor standing right beside the bed wouldn't hear a thing until they put their head inside the beam. Then they would experience it. So this is a great way for the body to receive healing benefits from, full body immersion in the music. Simultaneously, the patient would be wearing these high quality headphones. Now, why do I say high quality? This is all coming now to another discovery that I made 2 years ago. This is a fabulous discovery that, again, I think will help so many patients in the future in hospital settings. And it concerns what I'm notionally calling acoustic heterodyning. So it's a fancy sounding word, heterodyne. What does it mean? It means usually the mixing of electromagnetic frequencies to create new frequencies. So in the electronics industry, heterodyning is, a commonplace word. It's used by engineers in the electronics industry. And it just simply means that when you take two frequencies and you mix them together, electromagnetic frequencies we're talking about, then they will automatically create new frequencies, what are called sum, S-U-M, and difference frequencies. So some of them add and some of them subtract, and you end up with these new frequencies that are then utilized in the electronics apparatus, whatever it is, could be a television, a radio, whatever. But this term heterodyning is not usually used in audio. And the discovery I made was as follows, that I've been doing a lot of research into the vagus nerve and how the vagus nerve can have so many wonderful health benefits for anyone who cares to stimulate their own vagus nerve, right? So the vagus nerve, as you know, it leaves the brainstem. When it first leaves the brainstem, it branches off to the two ears, the tragus of the ears, the left and right ears. And this little flap of tissue that overhangs the auditory canal is literally where the vagus nerve first terminates. And this is great news because it means that we can stimulate the vagus nerve literally through the ears, through headphones, right? Then the vagus nerve goes to the pharynx and the larynx. More good news because we can stimulate the vagus nerve with our own voice. And then the vagus nerve branches off and goes to many different organs, to the liver, to the kidneys, to the pancreas, and so on, all the heart and even the gut. So we can stimulate all of these organs simply by specific frequencies that are received through the ears. Now, these frequencies that have been discovered, not by me in this case, but by many other researchers, have been discovered to be very, very low, in the order of 5 to 10 hertz, which is actually below the range of audibility for humans. Some animals can hear down there, like elephants and so on, but not humans. So below the range of audibility, the audibility for humans falls off at about 16 hertz. But researchers have found this range, 5 to 10 hertz, for optimal stimulation of the vagus nerve. So this particular day, a couple of years ago, I had been listening to some music from two dear friends of ours and colleagues now, Anders Holte, that's Holte, and his lovely wife, Kachina. I'd been listening to a wonderful album at breakfast time that they created. It's called The Dream of the Blue Whale. And on this album, you hear Anders effectively kind of mimicking the sounds of a blue whale, these beautiful, low frequency sounds. And I just had this thought this particular day, I wonder what vocal pitches Anders is able to get down to, and how low can he go. So I brought the album down into the lab here, and I literally put it into our system here and looked at it on the spectrum analyzer. And what I saw, Karen, was a really big surprise, because I was seeing frequencies down to the lowest bound on the analyzer is 12 hertz, but knowing that the shape of the that's a bell curve shape of the analyzer. Each frequency on the analyzer has a bell curve shape of spectrum of characteristic curve. So I knew that frequencies would be present down to 4 and 5 hertz. When you see the 12 hertz band dancing up, and I knew that there would be 4 and 5 hertz frequencies present. So this was amazing. I thought, well, how on earth is this possible? And one of the reasons I thought that is because, apart from the fact that I knew that the human voice can't get anywhere near those kind of frequencies, also engineers in recording studios press a button that rolls the frequencies off below 20 hertz. And they do that deliberately because speaker systems in particular cannot handle sounds below 20 hertz. They the cores of the speakers flap about, with very low frequencies. Even big speakers do that. So they roll the frequencies off. So that meant that the CD that I was playing from Anders and Kachina there were no frequencies present on that CD below 20 hertz. And yet here was the 12 hertz band dancing merrily up and down. You see? And this was the discovery. So then I excitedly went up into our home, brought down a whole bunch of other CDs to try. And lo and behold, some of them had the same effect and some didn't. And so it's still a bit of a mystery as to why that is. Well, it is indeed a mystery. But the good news is that we now have a bunch of albums that are creating in real time these heterodyne frequencies that are very, very low and can be used for vagus nerve stimulation, right? But you have to have, not through a speaker system, you have to have it through good quality headphones. Why? Because good quality headphones can indeed reproduce frequencies down to 5 hertz. So I recommend a type of headphone, a brand of headphone called Beyer Dynamic, Beyer Dynamic. And there's a model that they produce. Well, they produce many models, but there's a model called DT770 Pro. And this model, the reason I'm mentioning that, I don't have shares in Beyer Dynamic. Maybe I should, but I mentioned Beyer Dynamic in this particular DT770 Pro because they have an amazing frequency response of 5 hertz to 35,000 hertz.
Oh wow, that's a
and yet, amazing. And yet the price of them is really quite modest. There are many sets of headphones you can look at are high quality that have really big price tags attached to them, like $1,000, whatever, for good headphones. So these ones, are nowhere near that price, like $100 and something, but they are really, really high quality. And there was a funny little coda to this story, which is that when I spoke with Anders about it and said, did you know that well, of course you didn't know that your album is creating these really, really low frequencies down to 4 and 5 hertz. And he didn't believe it initially, but then I had to show him a video of the spectrum analysis actually happening in real time. And then, of course, he believed it. But then it turns out that he and Kachina actually own these same headphones, the DT770 Pro. And anyone, watching or listening to this, that want to literally go out and buy these headphones, please note that there are 3 models available. There's a 32 ohm. This is the resistance of the headphones, 32 ohm. There's also 80 ohm, and there's also a 250 ohm. Well, you can forget the 250 ohm. That is only for professional studio applications. But the other 2, 80 ohm model is for all Apple devices. So whether you have an Apple iPhone or an iPad or a computer, Apple computer, all for 80 ohm. Everything else, like for PCs, for Android-powered devices, for stereo systems, audio stereo systems, you want the 32 ohm model. So that's, and then you're going to benefit from a list of albums I'd be happy to share with you, Karen, that you can then, post on your website or whatever. This is a list of the albums that I've so far tested and that then produce the optimal vagus nerve stimulation. Now, that's a long-winded way of saying what benefits do we get from vagus nerve stimulation? Well, there are many, but one of them that has the most potential, let's say, in medical science of the future, again, coming back to this, a visualization here of a bed with a prone patient, and they're wearing headphones, and they're also receiving music through the full body as well, through the ultrasound speakers, right? This is the potential future. One of the benefits that they're going to receive from vagus nerve stimulation is complete reversal of chronic inflammation in their body. Now, chronic inflammation and chronic pain that very often associated with chronic inflammation cannot currently be cured by any medical intervention. There's no pill, there's no pharmacology that you can, use to reverse chronic inflammation. It usually happens, it occurs in many people's bodies because of a whole set of situations that occur where the cytokines in the bloodstream, there's two types of them primarily, and they become out of balance and they start to fight with each other. They have literally having a battle going on in your stream if you have chronic inflammation. Well, it turns out from many studies that simply by optimally stimulating the vagus nerve, that the cytokines gradually come back into balance. And it only takes about 3 weeks for this to happen. So literally by listening or experiencing beautiful music, right? These problems that people are experiencing, there are millions of people all over the world that have chronic inflammation in their bodies and the pain that goes with it. And by listening to beautiful music for, three or four times a day over a period of 3 weeks, the homeostasis of the body can be completely, retrieved, as it were.
Unbelievable.
One of the other many benefits is reduction of, slowing the rate at which we age, which is, I think, everybody's interested in. And then another one is a huge increase in cancer prognosis. And again, many studies are showing this, that anyone that is suffering from whatever form of cancer, the outcome will be greatly improved if they are stimulating their vagus nerve. So, that's just three of many different aspects of vagal stimulation. So it's a really wonderful future that lies ahead, Karen, in medical science. And, I had a chat with Shamini Jain on a podcast a few months ago. And she told me something that I didn't know about this gap between medical discoveries and actual practice, in a hospital setting. And it's apparently 17 years between, this is typical, between a discovery and literally this becoming utilized in a medical setting. Well, I can only hope, that is speeded up greatly in terms of this vagus nerve stimulation that I'm mentioning. And of course, also the idea of helping a patient in a hospital bed who is perhaps low on oxygen because either their respiration is poor or their heart, their power of their heart is not allowing enough oxygen into their bloodstream. Either way, low frequency sound coming up through the bed from low frequency transducers, literally into this bed of the future, could really help enormously that patient. And then all these other ways that I've been mentioning, the ultrasound speakers and the headphones, and all of this is feasible for the future. And it's an exciting future, actually.
It's very exciting and so non-invasive. So
yes.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can't overdose on music, at least not tonight.
I think in my teens, my dad might have thought that was possible, but yes, you cannot overdose on music. John, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who want to learn more about John's work and explore some of the products that John has that can help you bring the power of sound and the power of sound made visible into your life, you can visit and learn more about John's work on his website, CymaScope.com. That's CymaScope.com. You can also follow John on his YouTube channel. We will post in our show notes the list of the music that we need to be listening to for our vagus nerve. And also check out the shop on the CymaScope.com page where John has some products for you, including a Water Wonders kit, a CymaPlate kit, and coming up soon, you'll have your new CymaScope app. So stay tuned to the work that John is doing and make sure you get your version, the new version of the CymaScope app, and go check out what John's doing. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I have so many more questions. I'm looking forward to having you back sometime soon.
I'd love that.
And best good wishes and sending good healing energy to your wife as well. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. Many blessings.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. When I was a nursing student, One of the graduate students in our program noticed that music seemed to have a positive impact on babies in the NICU. She fought hard to bring music into the unit, which in turn encouraged the ICU nurses to do the same thing. They found that adding music seemed to decrease the stress of being in the ICU, and later conducted research to show that music in high-stress settings in the hospital can reduce stress and, in the case of the ICU specifically, reduce the incidence of ICU psychosis. The research of John Stuart Reid seems to reveal that there's more going on here than the music drowning out the beeps and sounds of the machinery in the ICU or babies being soothed by music. There's a mechanism at work here that seems to tell a story that sound and music do much more than nurture our senses. Sound and music have the power to heal. Cymatics has the capacity to help us see the mechanisms of how sound works to change and restructure the body towards a state of greater wellness and well-being. The programming of sound changes the structure and function of the body, and with the application of specific sound tones and frequencies, we can augment healing on the physical level or even enhance optimal wellness before illness even appears. As we explore how to heal a healthcare system that has spiraled out of control in the hands of insurance companies and the pharmaceutical industry, imagine how empowering and inexpensive it is to think about restoring or building wellness simply by adding the power of sound and music. If you'd like to learn more about John Stuart Reid's work and about Cymatics, please visit John's website, www.cymascope.com, or subscribe to John's YouTube channel. As we continue to explore the leading edge of integrated medicine and holistic healing, it is pioneers and independent researchers like John Stuart Reid who promise to lead the way with groundbreaking science to help us remember that sometimes the easy answer is the most elegant, and sometimes it's as simple as remembering the power of the heartbeat to heal. To get your free quantum human design chart, which includes the high-frequency quantum human design language, please visit www.freehumandesignchart.com. I'm Dr. Karen Curry Parker, hoping that this conversation helps you remember you deserve to tell a story about yourself that includes optimal well-being and health. Thank you for joining me for Quantum Revolution.
Thank you for joining us on Quantum Revolution with Karen Curry Parker. For more information on how to change your world and to hear more about our guest today, visit quantumrevolutionpodcast.com. Make sure you follow us on your favorite podcasting platform so you don't miss a single episode of Quantum Revolution. We'll see you next time for some more groundbreaking conversations with Karen and her guests. How will you impact your world today?